Right. So hello, everyone. My name is Manuel Escoto, and I'm CDTRP's Patient Family and Donor Partnerships Manager, and I'm here with the Transplant Research Foundation of British Columbia's Senior Advisor, Kristi Coldwell. As you prepare for your innovation grant submission, this video serves to help you understand the importance of patient engagement in your work and provide some strategies of how you can integrate PFD partners in your work. As you know from the innovation grant terms of references, you will be scored on your patient engagement plan, and this score represents 25% of your total score. As we get started, I'd first like to recognize that the CDTRP is hosted by the University of Alberta, and I also live and work in Edmonton, Alberta. And I respectfully acknowledge that we are located on Treaty 6 territory and respect the histories, languages, cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuits, and all First People of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community.
And I would like to acknowledge that the Transplant Research Foundation of BC is honored to learn, share, and connect on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded Coast Salish lands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh Nations, as well as the lands that I reside on, which is the Stolo, the Katzie, and the Kwantlen Nations.
Now, before I get started into what patient engagement is, I want to dispel a few myths I often encounter. First, patient engagement doesn't mean having your PFD partner in the lab with you. So while you may be working on, and I already messed up, sorry, I'm going to pause that. So second, PFD partners do not need a degree in the life sciences or experiences as research to support and join projects. Third, patient engagement is possible within basic science and clinical research, and if done correctly, it can and will strengthen the quality of your work. There also isn't a cookie cutter guide to provide. Each project and PFD partner is unique. They all come with unique circumstances and experiences. And this is all to say that patient engagement requires time and commitment to do so meaningfully. For us at CDTRP, patient engagement is about connecting and conducting research with patients across the entire research process, from priority setting to knowledge translation and evaluation. The underlying principle is that the persons affected by research have a right to have a say in how research is undertaken. Now, you may have heard the saying, nothing for us without us. And what this speaks to is the creation of meaningful partnerships based on shared power, co-learning, and co-development. Meaning PFD partners are partners and take leadership roles and decision-making roles within a research project. As you know, the Canadian Institute of Health Research developed the strategy for patient-oriented research, also known as SPORE. Now, the aim of SPORE principles really speaks to the need for researchers to plan and maintain research teams and environments with PFD partners based on the principles of inclusiveness, support, mutual respect, and partnerships. Now, in my role as the PFD Partnerships Manager, I do my best to adhere these roles, but I'll be the first to recognize that there are challenges. There's bandwidth issues, resources, competing priorities, short timelines, and each of these and the countless others that we experience on a daily basis, they really do slowly impact our ability to build relationships and spaces that are inclusive, supportive, and based on real partnerships. But when this happens, this in turn impacts on how PFD partners may feel about you, your research, your organization, and quite often leads to feelings of tokenism. Now, the CDTRP aligns with these principles because the end goal is to engage patients as partners and build strong and transparent partnerships, ensuring that our research is reflective of patient priorities and that the goal is to improve ultimately patient outcomes. This is why PFD partners should be, and more importantly, can be involved across the entire research spectrum. Now, having a direct connection with PFDs isn't as common for basic scientists, but without these connections, researchers may not appreciate the impact and consequences of their research. So ask yourself, how will you work with PFDs? If you're working with mice, for example, ultimately you have to get to how this is going to support patient outcomes. But once a partnership is established, you have a significant role in creating a collaborative and meaningful space. But where do we begin? Well, the first step is to correctly understand who a PFD partner is. You may encounter other terms that mean the same thing. For example, persons with lived experience, patient partners, community advisors, patient representatives, and probably others out there. At CDTRP, we do use the term patient, family, and donors, which includes both living donors and donor families to ensure that we cover the diversity of the transplant experience. But very, very importantly, PFD partners are not, I repeat, they are not study participants that you recruit to join a study and undergo an intervention. PFD partners are research members, no different than any other expert that you include in your research, in your grant submission, and your overall work. Now, as mentioned earlier, a key goal of patient engagement is relationship development, support, and capacity building to ensure PFD partners feel welcomed, safe, and heard. Now, to do so, some guidelines I provide include first, setting expectations early. What are their roles, responsibilities? Will PFDs be compensated either monetarily or through other means? This all needs to be outlined in your PFD engagement plan, and ideally, it's something that you co-develop with your PFD partners. Second, training and resources are important. As with other areas in science, you may need to train yourself in becoming strong and knowledgeable in patient engagement. And these training opportunities should also be extended to your patient partners. And three, recognizing supports are available to you and understand that you can't always do it on your own. So as you work on your grant submission, plan and budget for PFD engagement support, whether that's someone like myself at CDTRP or Kristi at TRFBC, there are mechanisms out there for you to do patient engagement better.
And so, as a researcher, you might be wondering, why is it so important to ensure that you are meaningfully and fulsomely engaging with those individuals that possess that lived or that living experience that is the focus of the research? So, first and foremost, it's about understanding and respecting the fact that the patients, families, and donors are the ones that possess that firsthand insight and awareness of what it means to live with an illness, a condition, and all the various experiences that that encompasses. And so it's not about competing priorities or viewpoints. It's really about complementing that existing expertise of the researchers and healthcare professionals. And knowing that when we bring together these diverse perspectives, that's where the real magic happens. That's when the research being produced is much more likely to be robust as well as inclusive. And also knowing that at the end of the day, we're all working towards the same common goal. And that's to improve the quality of life for patients as well as improve the overall experiences and trajectory of everyone involved in the organ donation and transplant community and in the overall science. And we really only accomplish that by working together and sharing our knowledge. And so, what does that mean for the world of basic science? How can PFD partners be engaged in that work? And so there has been a pervasive belief or a misconception, if you will, that there's not a lot of benefit to be had by including these really key voices and perspectives in this more bench area of study. However, that's not the case. The reality is that patient-oriented research or meaningful engagement really is an approach. So it's not a method. And because it is an approach, it can be really applied to any and all types of health research, including the more scientific areas of study. So it's also important to recognize that the level of engagement and the types of activities for your PFD partners in this area of study are not going to be the same or look quite as they would in other projects or areas of research. And that's okay. But it's for you as a researcher to really challenge yourself to be open to the possibilities around what this engagement can look like and the value that that PFD partner can add to this area of study. I think we can all appreciate that there is a little bit of a disconnect between the lab and patients, families, and donors. So, this isn't surprising. These are two worlds that are often very independent of one another, they exist in isolation. And that really speaks to why it is so important as researchers that you try and you strive to create those connections. Really try to create channels for open dialogue and communication, further bridging the great divide that can exist between the world of science and real life. And you will often find that it is your patient, family, donor partners that can be some of the biggest champions of this work. In fact, those PFD partners can really help to link that real world application with those novel and innovative ideas and ways of thinking. But it's also is more than that. You need to understand that in order for this to occur as researchers, you need to ensure that that research is being communicated in a way that's understandable and makes sense for your PFD partner. Of course, down the road, your PFD partner can greatly aid in that dissemination to the larger community. But if they don't understand what that research is about, then they're not going to be able to help you. So this understanding better enables them and really empowers them to be able to provide insightful feedback, really crystallize their thoughts and questions, and then work towards also identifying some priorities and priority objectives for the work as well. So it's really about moving that theory back into practice. As you'll often hear, it's about bench to bedside and beyond. And so, where do you go from here? We know this can be a little bit daunting. How do you seek help to identify patient family donor partners or just learn more about the world of meaningful engagement? So, an excellent first stop is to connect with Manuel, who is, of course, the CDTRP's PFD Partnership Platform Manager. He has a wealth of expertise and experience in this area. However, you can also consider consulting other organizations that support engagement in your area of research or your field of study. I know that for us at the Transplant Research Foundation of BC, this is often something that meaningful connection and helping to identify PFD partners that we assist our BC-based researchers with. But it's also bigger than that. It's recognizing that patients, families, and donors are all around us in the community. And a lot of these individuals, they want to learn about research and they want to become engaged in the process. So don't be afraid to talk about your research, to share your research, particularly those findings that are relevant and meaningful to them. And then, of course, there is that really loaded question around, can you ask your own patients that you are providing care for to serve as a PFD partner? And this is perhaps especially relevant for those clinician scientists. Now, there's no easy answer to this. This is a complicated area. And there's a lot of considerations that go into understanding how to ensure a positive and productive dual role relationship. So if this is something that you are interested in, I really do encourage you before you get started to talk to Manuel or to also consult with those patient-facing organizations around this key question. And so now you may have identified a PFD partner and you're wondering, where do you go from here? And so, what I would really encourage you to do at this point is to just pause and undertake some critical reflection on your end. Ask yourself, how do you envision those PFD partners being engaged in your research project? What are some of those roles, responsibilities, or activities that you believe that they could be involved in and add value to? And how do you see your project benefiting from their voices and their perspectives? But it's more than that. You really want to ask yourselves, how are you going to support their involvement? So, how are you going to ensure that you are properly onboarding them to the research, remembering they don't necessarily know what this project is all about, but also to this team itself? As Manuel mentioned earlier, it is vital to establish these meaningful connections and the relationships. The relationships are truly foundational to this type of work, and it's so important to recognize that very early on, right at the beginning. But then you're not done here. You need to take these questions and really pose them to your PFD partners. You need to ask them these questions as well. And you need to really listen and learn and hear what it is that they're telling you, what it is that they are going to need in terms of support to ensure that they can contribute in a meaningful and fulsome way. In addition to this, how do they want to be involved? What are some of their skill sets? What are some of their areas of interest as it relates to your research and the activities?
So when you're meeting with your PFD partners, ideally it's in an early stage of your work. And I certainly recommend during the priority setting and certainly before the grant submission. So if you're still looking for PFD partners, just contact us and we're happy to help identify some partners that can support. But when we ask you, how does your study advance scientific knowledge? Ensure you also discuss how your project advances knowledge that is significant to PFD to PFD partners and the broader transplant community. This slide has several questions that you can ask your patient partners to provide feedback on. And certainly as you develop your grant submission, this is going to show the reviewers how it's a PFD priority. When we speak about research feasibility, your PFD partners can help determine if your proposed PFD recruitment methods, for example, are feasible, if they're patient-friendly. As many of you may know, as many of you may not be working with human participants, your PFDs can advise and support communications related to translational potential. As your project advances to the clinical stage, PFD partners can again support recruitment efforts. And this slide provides some questions you should ask your PFD partners, especially when you're developing your recruitment strategy. The key thing as you develop your recruitment strategy, your intervention, is is there potential to cause undue burdens on participants? PFDs who have that lived experience can provide insights and expertise into those questions and concerns. This slide speaks about the engagement process itself and strategies to ensure that your PFD partners are properly integrated into the team. So when you're approaching PFDs to join your project, ask yourself, why did I choose this specific PFD partner? If your research impacts kidney transplant patients who experience renal failure due to posterior urethral valves, for example, it's not enough to just ask any kidney transplant recipient to join. You really want somebody with that lived experience to join your project because they're the ones who have gone through the process, through that journey, and have that lived experience to provide insights. How did you onboard your PFDs? It's important to meet with your PFDs one-on-one or with your research team. Explain the project, provide background information, share documents. Of course, share documents that are not of the scientific variety, and as much as possible, lay summaries, lay abstracts. But more importantly, give them the opportunity to ask questions and seek clarifications. If they're not sure what they're jumping into, that really creates barriers in how they can advise and ensure that your project continues on the correct trajectory. Set expectations, and as I mentioned earlier, compensation. Discuss and co-develop how your PFD partners will support this project. What are the timelines? How many hours will they be involved? There's many logistical aspects to PFD partnerships that you have to think about, consider, and ideally co-develop with your partners, with your PFD partners. How often will you be meeting? How are you meeting? Are you using Zoom, Teams? Is it phone? Is it in person? What are the impacts of that? How many hours will they be remunerated? Will they be co-authors, for example? These are things that you have to consider and really include in your PFD engagement plan. Some advice I always like to provide is the recommendation that you have more than one PFD partner on your team. Not only to bring that diversity, but you know what? Life happens. Sometimes PFDs are unable to continue on a project, and you don't want to be in a position where you're stuck with no PFD representation because that is a very big loss for your research team. So I know there's budget implications with this, and I do know for the innovation grant, compensation, PFD compensation is an eligible expense. So really consider how you're going to appropriately manage the timelines for your PFDs to join and support.
So, building a little bit more on what Manuel has already touched on regarding the roles for PFD partners, it's important to understand that there are a variety of opportunities in which these individuals can be engaged in the research project. So, this chart here actually provides an overview of some of those activities. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but it really does speak to the fact, and that's something I want to emphasize, is that PFD partners can be engaged at any of the stages in the research process. And that is an important point to keep in mind. But additionally, it's important to recognize that the level of engagement, as well as the types of activities, really does ebb and flow throughout the duration of that research project. So it's not something that remains static. It does evolve and depend on the research itself, those research questions, and again, the areas of interest and skill set of your PFD partners. And so we've talked a little bit today about what some of those roles for meaningful engagement can entail, but it's also critically important to recognize that your PFD partners are not there to serve as experts on the science itself. They are coming to that project with a wealth of lived experience, with extensive experiential knowledge. They do essentially have a PhD in lived or living experience, and that is the gift that they have. They're not there to provide expert advice on elements of the scientific design or areas of study. Yes, they can provide feedback and some insight on elements of the scientific pieces, especially as they relate to those PFD components or those participations, but they're not there to serve in that scientific expertise capacity. And I think we can all recognize and appreciate that there are challenges that accompany engagement work. And we know that some of these challenges can impede the success of the research as well as the success of that meaningful engagement and those relationships. So it really is about recognizing those challenges and pausing to be open about those and acknowledge them and take steps to address those. Even something as simple as the differences in the knowledge and the experiences of patients, families, and donors compared to the researchers and the research team, if not identified or acknowledged early on, can potentially pose a challenge down the line in the communication, impeding that positive and productive relationship. So it's also about recognizing, and I think we all know this, that there are those inherent challenges to limited time as well as resources. We know that researchers are being pushed and pulled in a variety of directions. But again, it's about, as a researcher, really reaffirming your commitment to undertake meaningful engagement, avoiding that tokenism that was mentioned earlier, and also really recognizing, respecting, and appreciating those individual PFD partners for the individuals that they are and what it is that they are able to bring to the research team.
So as we wrap up, really over the next two slides, I just want to leave you with a few takeaways. Feel free to pause the video and review them in depth. But the message is that PFDs can and will improve your research if you plan appropriately. And again, we understand that many of you may not have much experience or some experience within patient engagement, but that's why we're here. That's why CDTRP is here, or other organizations such as TRFBC. We are more than happy to help and advise on your patient engagement plan as you work on your submission plans. And if you haven't already, please, I encourage you to get a PFD onboarded before you submit your grant. It will only improve your overall score, I'll say, because they'll be able to provide insights on some of the work that that you're working on. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me, Manuel Escoto. My email is there, mescoto@cdtrp.ca, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.